I'm 103 years old, and I'll tell you something nobody will say aloud the way I must. I didn't ignore the warning. I underestimated it. I carry that sentence like a folding chair I keep setting down in different rooms of my life, thinking I'll pick it up later. Only later didn't come the way I assumed it would. Think of one person you haven't called in a while. Hold their face in your mind for 10 seconds before you keep listening. It was October 14th, 1955. The kettle had just started to sing when Robert hadn't come back from the mill. I remember the kitchen light catching the pattern in the linoleum, the way his coat hung on the peg by the door. I drove to the mill because I was certain he'd simply been delayed. I told myself reasonable things while the road widened into the parking lot. Then the nurse's voice over the phone. Careful, not cruel, and the hospital smell as I ran inside. They told me he was gone. He was 33. After that day, I was a different person for a little while. I vowed, out loud to no one and to everyone, that I would never take ordinary time for granted again. Not another day wasted, I said. I meant it. I swore I would walk with him every afternoon, fold the laundry with him in the living room instead of rushing to the sink. Stop that habit of putting a dish aside to do later. For weeks I did. I left notes on the table. Little reminders of what mattered. Go for a walk. Call your mother. Listen. Those weeks were honest. They were like fresh paint on wood. But life has a patient way of smoothing paint back toward the old grain. I remarried. His name was Charles, and we built a new rhythm together that lasted 42 years. We had William and James. There were jobs that needed our hands and bills that needed signing. There were quarrels so small they hardly deserved the name, and there were winters when both of us were too tired to make pancakes. You learn, over time, that intentions thin out into habit. The vow I made the day Robert died settled into the same ordinary pocket where spare buttons, receipts, and that brittle photograph go. Useful once in a while, forgotten the rest of the time. I break these memories down into small images, because that's where the cost lived. The laundry would pile because the calendar said wash, and because the next week's uniform needed ironing. I would fold shirts at the counter while Charles would stand by the back door waiting for a walk we never took. Later, we'd both wonder why we had a drawer full of shirts and little else that felt like living together. Another time, when William was home between jobs, I looked at his tired face and went back to washing dishes because there was company coming, and the dishes felt urgent. He left for work the next morning and never came back. He died in 1987 at 45. It wasn't a headline moment for anyone else. It was a Tuesday that walked off quietly. The things I'd promised myself would not be wasted were wasted on small deferrals. The I'll do it tomorrow, that acts like an ally, and turns out to be the thief. I want you to understand that I'm not telling you this so you will feel scolded. I'm telling you because the way memory softens warnings is the real danger. People think warnings fail because they were ignored up front. I know better now. I paid attention when the alarm rang. I heard it. I promised. The trouble is that the ringing becomes background noise. You promise, then you underestimate your own readiness to let that promise dissolve. We underestimate how quickly grief and habit will lull us back into autopilot. There were 3 husbands, and, over time, a life full of ordinary omissions. Charles went before me after 42 years together. Frank came into my life later, steady and quiet, and he lived to be 98. I learned how to marry and how to be alone in different seasons. I learned how to cook a good roast and how to balance the checkbook. I learned how to be distracted with a small, relentless focus. Folding one more shirt, answering one more letter, scrolling through a page of news, because it felt like staying informed. Each small absence stacked like pennies in a jar, until the jar was heavy enough to make the whole table tip. It is the accumulation that surprised me most. Nobody wrote me a manual that said, "The real loss will not be the big tragedies. It will be the tiny, repeated withdrawals of attention." It is the day you choose the crossword over the conversation. It is the time you let your eyes slide to the television when someone begins to tell you about their mother. It is putting the phone on the table between you and the person you love, and pretending it is simply a tool. Those small absences rearrange the house of a life. They take rooms that should be full and make them hollow. There are moments written in my bones that I would live again if someone let me. Once, when William was 27, he came to see me at dawn. He had bad news in his pocket, and he wanted to talk as if the words might be softer in the kitchen light. I had just started a load of laundry. I told him to sit for 5 minutes while the washer finished. He sat and he told me what he'd been carrying. When he left, I remember thinking I'd been kind. I had not sent him away. But we did not go for a walk. We did not sit with the coffee cooling on the table. A week later, he called to apologize for being sullen, and there were no more mornings like that. You think later will hold what the present refuses to. Later does not always keep promises. James, my other son, comes by every Sunday. He still does. He always brings flowers in a jar that looks hand-picked, even when it's raining. He sits for an hour and we talk about small things. He folds my cardigan over his arm when I get cold. I don't tell you this to make you think all is regret and loss. I tell you because the things I treasure now are the small visits, the held hands, the half-hour he sits with me while Sophie, my great-granddaughter, scrolls through images on her phone and then tucks it away to listen. Sophie is 16 now. She has the quick smile of the family and the long patience for dramatics I never had. She likes pancakes I make with too much cinnamon. She will not remember me as I was at 80. She'll remember me as I am when I stop sewing while she tells me about school. Remember and return is the phrase I have given myself for the last years, because I needed something simpler than a long vow. When I notice my attention has slipped, when I'm thinking of what to cook next instead of the person sitting across from me, I say out loud, remember and return. It is a small ritual, not a remedy. Say it softly in your head. Say it with your teeth. Say it to the empty room if you must. Then close the magazine. Put the phone face down. Stand up from the folding chair and go sit where the other person is. Remember and return. This practice doesn't undo what was missed. It can't conjure a different past. But it changes the accumulation. If you choose presence again and again, the small absences stop becoming your default. Presence is not heroic. It is 1,000 tiny choices. Canceling one errand to listen, leaving one dish for later to hold a hand, turning off the TV for the sound of someone's voice. It's not perfection. It's persistence. You will forget the mantra sometimes. You will not show up perfectly every day. The point is to come back to the person quickly when you realize you've drifted away. Years make a life complicated. There are necessities, work, bills, health, that are not optional. I'm not saying you should throw all responsibility to the wind. I'm saying that presence is a currency you can use in the margins, and those margins add up. When my husband Frank was dying, I sat by his bed and folded a towel because folding something made me feel useful. I could have been only that tender, doing a small domestic thing while I listened to his breathing. Those are the moments that become the architecture of a life remembered. They were not grand gestures. They were ordinary acts of attention that felt like prayer because they were offered fully. I have also learned to be gentle with myself. Regret can educate without destroying. The sharp edge of what I wish I had done doesn't need to cut everyone else. If a young person hears me and thinks they have failed, I want them to know they haven't. The only failure here is resignation, deciding that the patterns can't be changed. You can change them. It starts with a single small step. A call, a visit, a held gaze. If you're still there with me, hear this practical list like a small gift from someone who has had decades to practice. Call the person you thought of at the start of this talk. If distance keeps you from visiting, call. If you're in the same house, sit beside them without doing anything else for 10 full minutes. Put your phone in another room when you're with someone who needs you. Make one extra pancake tomorrow morning and share it across the table instead of eating alone. Take a walk you would have postponed and leave the to-do list behind. Read a page of something aloud. Say, "Tell me more," when someone starts to speak and mean it. I do not promise miracles. I will not tell you that a phone call will change a life or buy back a year. I will tell you this truth. Those small choices change how you remember your life and how your life remembers you. They are not magic. They are method. There is a day I return to, often in my mind. It is not the day the doctors said he was gone. It is a small late afternoon when the light came in at an angle through the kitchen window, and I had stacked the mail on the table because I thought I had time to sort it later. A chair sat empty by the window. I remember the way the tea had gone cold. That was the kind of Tuesday I want to warn you against. Ordinary and deceptively permanent. I did not ignore the warning that came with Robert's death. I heard it. I underestimated how often I would forget to act on it. Now, at 103, I can count the days I felt truly present on a handful of fingers. They're not all attached to dramatic scenes. One is a quiet afternoon when James called to ask about an old recipe and I wrote it down with him, line by line. One is the morning Sophie and I made pancakes and she cracked the eggs into the bowl and laughed at how clumsy she was. One is a late evening when I sat with Frank and we did not speak, but the silence was full. Each of those days is bright enough to light a corner of the darker years. So I will end the way I began, with the sentence I've taught myself to carry lightly and honestly. I didn't ignore the warning. I underestimated it. That's the thing I'm laying at your feet. Do not let underestimation be the thief of ordinary time for you. Remember and return. Now, before this ends, do this one thing. Pick up the phone, or step into the next room. Call or visit the person you pictured when I asked you at the start. If distance makes visiting impossible, make the call anyway. If you are with them now, put everything else down and look at them until you can see what they are not saying. Do it in the next hour. Do it without apology. I didn't ignore the warning. I underestimated it. Remember and return.